Evening, everyone. Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com, with our speaker and our co-moderator tonight, Tufan Guven. Tufan's subject, Tufan's subject tonight is the geometry of higher dimensions, higher dimensional geometry, and he's done some amazing work preparing new graphics and a presentation for tonight. So this is a very serious new discussion of cosmic geometries, and I'm going to do a little prologue. Before we do that, we'd like to welcome everyone here. Dan Mack is here from the Northwest, our plasma fire expert, and Russell is here, who's leading our team for Discord. And I see Terry Burns has joined us, as Tufan said she would. That's wonderful. Welcome, Terry. Cool.
Hi, Terry.
So, Tufan, announcements, please.
Sure. So starting with next week's lecture, we are going to have Ralph Otterpole, Dr. Ralph Otterpole. He'll be talking about his new book, Raising Our Vibrations, Etheric Hygiene for Body, Houses, and the Fields. And the following week, we'll have our lecture with Terry, whom will join our conversation towards the end of our presentation here. So tonight we are planning to have an interactive presentation both with Dan and Terry. So other than that, our registration process for our new October conference in South France, October 9 to 14, is going very well, and almost half of our single rooms are already booked up. And I think these are all from me, and I'll continue after you then.
Great. Yeah, I think that's very cool. Tufan is so organized. So the announcement of our international conference this year, October 9 to 14, South France, fractalfield.com/2025. And note, as Tufan said, here we are only a few weeks in, and already about half the rooms are booked. It's pretty cool. So appreciate your interest. We had super fun last year, so consider coming and playing with us. Speaking of which, I think Terry Burns is coming as well. That's very cool. And Dan Mack is coming. It's going to be a party, as usual. All right. So now the next subject is you say you're going to say it, and then you say you said it, and then you no. Anyway, this is the intro of the intro. So Tufan's subject tonight is the geometry of higher dimensions, and he's done serious work to prepare some new graphics to put this together, the pieces. And I just want to do a 3-minute warm-up for that subject. You remember where we were in that conversation when the New Age woo-woo saying, well, we're in higher dimensions. There's nothing there for an electrical engineer to talk about. It's pure woo-woo. Whereas our view of what going to the next dimension is geometrically is very, very measurable and electrical. And let's give the classic example here to think about as Tufan is ready to begin, which is, my view is that the best example there is of what goes to higher dimensions is specifically DNA. So remember, we said that going to the next dimension only and always means superposing the next higher order of rotation, which shows up in a longer wave in the frequency signature. So the frequency cascade becomes more inclusive. Practical example. So if you take the tetra cube, as you all know, and you tilt it, visualize the cube as 3D. Now, if you tilt that cube up 32 degrees, rotate and blink 5 times, you have this pent dodeca in the Star Mother kit. You can't see the cube very well in there. But then the point is, so you could say literally that those people who are trying to look at a tesseract, an unpacked cube, and say that's 4D, electrically, that's a no-go. No, what is a go electrically is the only way to superpose another axis of spin around a cube. The only way is to tilt it 32 degrees and then rotate, blink 5 times, and you have specifically then got a pent dodeca of edge golden ratio to that cube, 0.618. So to go to the higher dimension was superposing another axis of spin symmetry. And only golden ratio allowed you to do that, to embed the cube in the dodeca. Now, if you take that dodeca and ratchet it down the stairway helix, now you've added a next longer wave. So you get 3, 4, 5 axes of superposed spin in the slinky helix, that is the DNA, the dodeca down the helix, we call DNA. Now, if you take that helix and you braid the braid of the braid of the braid on the long wave on the short wave up to 7 times, thread to string to rope to fat rope, each time you add another braid, you're superposing a longer wave. Now,
so basically what Dan is saying when he talks about Platonic solids, he's using those Platonic solids as wave guides, because each Platonic solid has a different set of symmetry axis, and as you shift from one to another, you shift the symmetry axis, symmetry operations as well, and that change brings the additional dimension. Sorry, Dan, please.
Oh, no, wonderful, wonderful. So, and that was a superposed axis spin. By the way, the tetracube 7 spins in the tetra, and the dodeca 5 spin, it's a pent symmetry. 5 spins, 7 spins, the Anu, all those stories, which Tufan will speak of tonight. Point being that we are not speaking theoretical woo-woo here. No, we're speaking measurements of the increased braid density in DNA in response to heart coherence, for example, measurements Glenn Ryan did at my suggestion. Point being that when you superpose a longer wave based on golden ratio, you initiate implosive compression. And ultimately, the DNA becomes measurably, actually, when it gets thicker and thicker, the plot thickens, becomes donut shaped. Do research on circular DNA and toroidal DNA. It's real. It's photomicrowave. It's real. And the point is that during that recursive implosive braiding, embedding, the compression enables at the center a compression point which embeds the DNA into a larger and larger array. We believe it's longitudinal coherent EMF radiating coherently into a bigger and bigger array. The next dimension is specifically the larger array that you can inhabit when you've superposed axes of spin. So this metaphor about the next dimension means is actually God is the guy that can inhabit the biggest array. I mean, you are the guy that if you get centripetal in a larger array, that means you are what you used to call God, literally the divine presence. Point being, this is now an electrical engineering measurable by power spectra description of what it means to go to the next dimension. Recursive implosive braiding, centripetal force. As the centripetal force implodes at Planck, it embeds and coheres into a larger and larger array. And eventually, your aura bends stars. You went to the next dimension. So that is a conversation we've had dozens of times in our presentations on DNA. And that's kind of the metaphor then that Tufan is going to review in more detail with graphics. I just thought I would warm the stage since I was enthused.
Yeah, and my mission is to simplify this.
Yeah, that's right. Tufan's going to make it understandable. So
let's see if I'm going to be successful.
Take it away, Tufan. Go for it, please.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Hi, everyone. This is Tufan Guven, representative at geometricmodels.org. So I'm going to share my screen now. Share presentation. And here you go.
Let's
go to the first slide.
We see it well. Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right. So yeah, today we are talking about switching dimensions as part of the FractalU.com program. Most of our understanding of mathematics were rooted back in the time of the Pythagorean era. And the Plato's Academy and Neoplatonist schools, they generally had a perspective like the form and the geometry and also beauty would actually reflect itself from a higher dimension that's above us. And they would suggest that that dimension would be the source of everything, and everything would be united as in the monad, everything in harmony with consciousness. And that consciousness wanted to represent itself in the 3D world that we perceive as this space-time universe as forms and shapes. And this is why it is crucial to understand how shape and form is formed, basically. So what are the fundamentals behind that process? That's what we will attempt.
Tufan, I think we lost your voice for a second. You know, I'm reminded of Jake of Astral Urma talking about how when you're entering into a lucid dream or an astral battle, as it were, to decide where you precipitate, literally to decide where you emerge into the astral, that kind of navigating, almost like a Stargate, is where the next dimension crystallizes into the lower dimension crystallizes into a higher dimension. So that ability to set the focal point of where you arrive is related to what Tufan's saying about the higher dimensions have determined in a way with what's going to happen here. I think Tufan will be back with us in a moment. Meantime, I see Terry Burns has arrived. Hi, Terry.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, good. So Terry is doing the lecture on May 3, right, Terry?
That is right. And I'm looking forward to it. And we're going to learn a lot about the secret history of Dan Winter. So I asked if it's all right to share this with folks. That I wanted to interview Dan just for some things I was curious about concerning our mutual friend Vincent Bridges, who died about 11 years ago. But it had to do then with it all works its way back to Dan. And when he was in New York, and then when he was in North Carolina, and of course, my friends here in the States, like, of course, Shore or Chapel at Sarah Narad and others like that, hung out with Dan then. And then there was a fascinating person, Tom Sawyer, not the Mark Twain Tom Sawyer. So this Tom Sawyer had an after-death experience. Several of them talked about them. Dan might say talked about them incessantly, if that's not an overstatement, that he'd start when the sun was up and continue till it came up the next time. But he was someone in Dan's circle then, and his recollection of the afterlife was a powerful, motivating idea of mine. And then I found that he knew Dan, and there's a lot of questions I wanted to ask Dan. So he agreed to just do it on a video, which sounds awesome to me. And then anything, Dan, that you want me to ask you, of course, I would love to do that too.
Well, we might make the point that Vincent Bridges was, among other things, the hero of the study of esoteric alchemy and the John Dee stories, and even some things we teach about alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone come from Vincent. So those stories we're going to be pursuing with lots of fun.
As they say, we will pursue them with great vigor, and it should be a blast.
So Tufan, we were just talking about the next May 3 with Terry while we were waiting for you, Tufan.
Yeah, sorry about that. Had to reboot the modem here.
Good.
All good.
And Tufan, I added the idea that when you decide where to land inside the astral lucid dream, it's like the higher dimension precipitating to the lower, just like you were saying.
Yeah. So what did you hear last?
Just about, that the higher dimensions seem to precipitate and affect our reality, is what you were saying.
Right. So basically, the philosophy of earlier philosophers and ancient sacred teachings and schools would suggest that the higher consciousness or the higher level of reality, the oneness in harmony, would represent or reflect itself in the form of shapes. And I have an echo. Could you please mute your mics, please? And those shapes, like, sometimes you would feel attraction towards such shapes. And that would also depend on their ratios and their forms. But if we understand the foundation of how those shapes are formed or the mechanics behind that, we will better understand the nature of the universe. And by looking into that, at times I will try to reverse engineer some of the understandings to spread it to a wider area to explain switching dimensions. So I believe that we have enough number of evidences to support our case that the universe has a consciousness behind, and that consciousness works with concrete, solid mathematics. So there are some things that we can change and some things that we cannot. The things that we cannot change are the rules of the universe. And the things that we can change are like our emotions, our consciousness, and our reality to a certain extent. But if we can better understand the things that we cannot change, which are the rules of the universe, then we will better develop our technologies accordingly for the benefit of the world. This is why we have been developing piezofire.com, firea.com, crystal fire, and etc. So when the grand scale of the universe is a great example to start with. And, you know, in the picture, you see cluster of galaxies all connected with each other through large plasma elements. And when we look at the natural laws, almost in all esoteric and mystic traditions, they have similar perspectives. And one of the universal laws among many is the rule of polarity, the discipline of polarity. So based on that, everything is dual, everything has its opposite, like plus and minus, light and dark. And when we look at the universe, we see that at some points there are accumulation of matter or clusters of galaxies, and at some point we see vast emptiness. Even though it's not empty, it's the charge field in the amorph form. It's not organized. It's in a disorganized charge field. But at some places, it is organized, as we can see. And we will try to understand why matter chooses those specific places to organize itself, or this is what we call self-organizing. This is the principle of self-organizing. And this also ties into the understanding of compression. Because in the dualistic perspective of polarity, this principle reflects itself as the compression and rarefaction. Rarefaction is the absence of compression. So as I said, galaxies tend to accumulate at specific places of the universe. And the Nature magazine took this in its cover, is this the shape of the universe? So what they did was basically they measured the cosmic microwave background radiation, and they generated the temperature map of the whole universe. And according to that, they applied different geometrical forms, both Platonic and Archimedean. And they tried to see if any of these geometries has a relationship with the universal form. And they noticed that except for the dodecahedron, which is the shape of the Star Mother kit, none of them had any relationship except for the dodecahedron. So dodeca, a 12-sided geometry, Platonic solid 3D geometry, is that defines the shape of the universe. And that also gives us a clue how clusters of galaxies, they choose to self-organize themselves. Because we will see in this presentation that this is a pure golden ratio model. You can see the pentagonal faces, 12 faces. And so we understand that compression and rarefaction can very well be replaced with the understanding of matter and dark matter, actually. And also, Dan Winter has elaborated in his books, one being the last one, plankfire.com, the universal qualities of the universe is compressible, charge, behaves like a fluid. Again, these are the qualities of the charge, the universal energy field, which is sometimes called etheric field, sometimes chi, orgone. So it has to be compressible, behaves like a fluid, stores inertia when it rotates, which we will see later today, And in certain geometries, fractal conjugate, etc., it appears to self-organize and become intelligent and alive. So it gains consciousness. And without understanding this principle, we can never understand switching dimensions. This is very crucial because anything needs to have any being who wants to switch dimensions will need consciousness. We'll need to choose between wave signatures. It needs to adapt to a specific waveform. In order to do that, it needs to have consciousness. So it doesn't, it's not going to affect randomly or coincidentally. So this is why consciousness is key in this aspect.
We have said that where compression is enabled, you have mass, and where recursive compression is enabled, you have implosion and the beginnings of self-organization and literally awareness and sacred space. So it leads to, as Tufan says, the next dimension.
So as said, certain geometries, fractal conjugate, it appears to self-organize and become intelligent and alive. And when we talk about fractality, just a few slides, not too much. So any fractal system needs to have two qualities. First one is self-similarity and the second one is repetition. So the system in itself has to be self-similar. The pieces have to be similar to each other, and also the pieces have to be similar to its whole, like the universe. And also, as being similar means being repetitive. So it needs to repeat itself, as we see in the example, in the pictures.
And Thoth's book begins with "as above, so below."
Yes. So different traditions have different expressions on this. In Sufism as well, fractality was elaborately explained, as well as Hermetism. Some examples from plant life. We see fractal distribution patterns. In the human body, starting from the left, we see the lymphatic system, blood circulation, lungs, and the neurons, all fractal systems. And another self-similarity at its peak is the similarity between the neurons and the superclusters. When you see how superclusters are connected to each other through the vast plasma channels, which is like the bloodstream of the universe, you can see this similarity in between. And there was a study done in Brandeis University, which explored the similarities between the neurons of the brain and the university. They came to the conclusion that the qualities of both systems are extremely similar. And then this study was conducted by different universities, all came to the same conclusion. And then another question comes to mind is that, are we consciously creating this universe in our minds? And this subject has also been popularized by the New Scientist magazine, Fractal Universe, some fractal patterns. Another article talking about consciousness in the universe, suggesting that consciousness in the universe is scale invariant and implies an event horizon of the human brain. And we can just multiply these articles. This is just one example. There are actually many.
And by event horizon, it actually implies a kind of black hole as well.
Yes. So we see fractal qualities from micro to macro at all scales in this universe. And some examples from the quantum field done by Yazdani Group Project, Princeton University. And also another article, scientists discover fractal patterns in a quantum material. So the examples are just endless. If you Google it, you will see tons of articles about that. But when we want to apply this understanding to geometry, we can maybe start with analyzing star symbolism and the pentagon, which has been maybe the most sacred symbolism in the history of alchemy and esoteric mystic traditions, which we will be talking about with Terry towards the end of this presentation. Star symbolism and using it with alchemical rituals.
I mean, we've always known that the pent was so powerful symbolically, but when you label it implosive charge collapse, suddenly it's an answer to a long-term problem in physics. What causes implosive charge collapse? This tuned Planck.
Yes. So to simplify that, we need to understand what golden ratio is, which is a relationship between two systems. It can be time, length, mass, as we are showing in through the Planck scales. But to simplify this, we have, let's say, a unit of length. And when we want to divide this from the golden ratio point, instead of dividing it from the middle, we kind of go a little bit off, which is the point where it gives us exactly 0.618 proportion and 0.382. And if you add them to each other, you will get the unit 1. So the shorter segment to the middle segment is exactly 1.618 ratio. And the middle segment to the longer segment is also 1.618 golden ratio. So by having the same ratio of relationship between two systems from shorter to middle and then middle to the whole, it gives us the definition of harmony. That's very critical. If you want to reach harmony, the only ratio you can use is golden ratio to have the same ratio going forward.
And it's also the mathematics of perfected fractality, and that's perfected compression. That's when it becomes physics.
Right. So we can then take these measurements or lengths and apply it to a star geometry. So the longest segment, this one, do you see my cursor there?
Yes, we can see your cursor.
The longer segment goes to the red segment here, and the middle one goes to green, and the shorter one goes to purple perfectly. So then, and then if you want to continue this, even the pink one is the golden ratio division of the purple one. So you will see that the star symbol has perfect golden ratio relationships among its inner dimensions and parts. So this is why we tend to use the star symbolism as the understanding of this principle. And I showed the golden scaling, how to divide the lengths. So this is a basic golden ratio relationship among three systems, three lengths. If you want to continue this further, then you would gain arithmetic and geometric mean at the same time, which is unique to golden ratio in the whole universe of mathematics. And if you do this, you can again apply these dimensions to this star symbolism, star inside the pentagon, inside the star, inside the pentagon. So you can distribute those golden ratio relationships exactly in this model. And that understanding, if you have come here until like very well understood, and you will understand constructive wave interference, because any wave system wants to be constructive, they have to agree on that specific golden ratio points each time they meet. So
which is to say, when Tufan says geometric and arithmetic, it means they both add and multiply. And what waves have to do to interfere recursively constructively is they have to both add and multiply. It's called recursive heterodyning. And so that's what makes it implosive.
Right. So this form, if you look at it on a flat plane, like this is the side view of that previous picture. So you would see how the waves implode towards the inner star in here. So it starts from here, continues spiraling and goes all the way to the center, implode to the Planck scale. And if you can do that in golden ratio, you would naturally create constructive wave interference, which is a solution to negentropy, gravity, charge implosion. And this is the fundamental of all our technologies that we are generating.
And a turning point was when we proved that this is literally how hydrogen is built.
Right. So this is from geometrypuzzles.org, Sacred Geometry poster, a graphic designed by Casey House. You can see that, again, the relationship of golden ratio in the star symbolism. And as we said, phi is the only ratio which allows wavelengths to both add and multiply constructively. So as Dan explained, I'll just go over it. When it says adding and multiplying, you add the two numbers in the sequence, you get the third one. And multiplying means you get any number in the system and multiply it with 1.618. Again, you get the next one. So this means adding and multiplying constructively that will contain its integrity throughout the whole system until you reach the Planck scale. So this creates implosive charge collapse. This is why we are using these in our frequency signatures, basically. And some graphic versions as well. Phase conjugation here, number one. This means if you can apply this in opposite directions, you can achieve time reversal, which was measured first time in history in optic physics by focusing two lenses together in a very delicate laboratory environment. And number two is what we have talked about, constructive wave interference. And number three is the holy grail of fusion, implosion, and gravity making. So that's the 3D spiral reaching to the middle point. It looks like a cup. And and our friends started creating those cups in Latin America. And another nice example that I very much like consulting is that the superatoms, the electron valence symmetry is always the dodeca-icosa symmetry. So what we call superatoms are that these atoms have unique qualities like zero electrical resistance and high dielectricity. Am I right then? It was high dielectricity and super electrical resistance, right?
High dielectric is sometimes modeled that way, barium strontium. The point is that, let's see, noble gases, platinum group metals, nanohydrogen, microhydrogen, and
superconductivity.
Yeah, and monoatomic carbon, as in fullerene, these are all conjugators, and they're conjugators implosive because, as Tufan just said, the outer electron shell geometry is dodeca-icosa, the DF subshell.
Right.
And those shells are completed.
Yeah. I mix superconductivity with high dielectricity, something different. So superatoms have the qualities of zero electrical charge resistance and superconductivity, which is extremely important, not only in the industrial sector, but also spiritually, because this tells us the way how zero electrical resistance is reached through what we have been explaining so far. If you can create that consecutive golden ratio symmetry systems, that will automatically generate zero electrical resistance, because this is the path of the optimum, the least resistance of charge to pass through. And this is key for switching dimensions as well, because if you want to switch dimensions, like you don't want to bump to a wall, right? You want to go through a portal, ideally. So if you want to do that, the only way you can do it is with zero electrical charge resistance. Could be an example waveguide for you.
We could give a practical example. It's beautiful, Tufan, that within the thread of DNA, if you zap it with lightning at the moment of crystallization, it'll become a superconductor. And the same is true of a thread of gold. And that's literally how we think Daniel Brinkley had bliss with his near-death experience with lightning. So, which is an introduction to the physics of Kundalini. So you see where these things are going.
Right. So this subject has been taught in the earlier Platonic schools, like Plato's Academy and Neoplatonic, Pythagorean schools as well. But they were kept in secret circles, and the disclosure of this information was forbidden with big penalties. And so this was considered to be esoteric information and not exoteric. It wasn't open for public. The first time we can read the explanation of Platonic solids, we go to Plato's famous Timaeus, which is one of the most alchemical books of Plato, describing the functions of the universe, how it operates in a very alchemical way, and also gives us definitions of the Platonic solids as well. And one of the interesting examples in history is Hippasus. Hippasus, also an earlier philosopher, who disclosed how to construct a dodecahedron, which was extremely dangerous to disclose, and he was charged with death, and they threw him in the open sea, and he was drowned to death in an open sea because he disclosed the construction of a very sacred system. So we have such examples from history. And long after, we happen to see those exact drawings by Leonardo da Vinci in the late 15th century in the book of Luca Poccioli, who was commissioned by the Medici family. And of course, this ties into another discussion whether these sacred information is given through the elites, or that does it come out originally? So I don't know, it would be an interesting discussion. And then Kepler, in 1596, in his famous book, Mystery of the Cosmos, Kepler published his work on geometry of the universe, mystery of the cosmos. And so this work is concerned with the significant ratios of the celestial spheres and the real and proper causes for the number, the size, and the periodical movement of the spheres, presented with the help of 5 Platonic solids for the stabilization of the solar system. And Kepler describes the order of the solar system, and in accord with Copernicus, he put the sun into its center intuitively, describing gravity through charge collapse towards center.
It's so cool that, he intuited, if you nest the Platonic solids, you get golden ratio, although he didn't know that explicitly. And in fact, golden ratio is the dominant geometry of the solar system's orbitals. But what they didn't know is that when you nest them and get golden ratio, you do create charge collapse because you have golden ratio, and that is the cause of gravity. So Kepler was more right than he could ever have imagined.
Right. And he explained this by tying the orbital planetary mechanics with geometry, spheres, and Platonic solids. He put those shapes inside each other. He has multiple books, another one being The Harmony of the World. So in 1619, Kepler published 5 books on the harmonies of the world. And Kepler described an interesting body with 30 faces, which is formed by the intersection of 5 differently turned cubes with identical center. So basically what he did was, as you can see on the top right picture, he took the cube and turned it 5 times, blinking 5 times and creating the dodecahedron. Because as you can see in the picture, the corners of the the vertices of the cube are touching some vertices of the dodecahedron. And if you spin it 5 times, all the vertices of the dodecahedron would be touched by the cube at the end after 5 spins. Sorry. So this is how rotation can help you from one dimension to another. So we have cube in one dimension. By rotating it, you get dodecahedron as an example of the following dimension. And we will come back to this later.
And that is perfect embedding. And remember, the dodec is 0.618, the cube is 1.0. And
Right.
that's repent and be saved.
There are multiple embedding relationships among Platonic solids. These two are just one example of that relationship. They are all very instructive. And so Kepler, when he was explaining this model, he was giving us clues about self-organization. So yes, he was using Platonic solids, but there is a consciousness here that self-organizes itself. And another example of self-organization in the solar system was given by this website, spirasolaris.ca, where you can see the relationship between the orbits of the planets, mathematically described clearly, with the golden ratio through the Fibonacci sequence. So we can see that golden ratio has been a very critical key in generating or stabilizing gravity and self-organization in wave systems among all universe, from micro to macro, from the super atoms to the structure of the universe. So, so far, many people have earned Nobel Prizes for their discoveries of golden ratio in self-organizing systems. And I suggest the next Nobel Prize will be given to the person who proves the absence of golden ratio in any given self-organizing system.
And in fact, if golden ratio is proven to be the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics, that might in itself be the proof that that's how gravity is organized.
Right. So this has been popularized a few years ago. I think that was in 2019. This news came out. This James Webb Telescope taking the picture of the black hole, and then the following year, with further measurements, they edited their version and came up with a more sophisticated image of the black hole. And the same year, there was another article about this very same black hole by Harry Hahn. And you can see the source here. And actually, he helped us realize that this picture that you saw here was only part of a large system. So what they did is they cropped out this outside part and just gave us this circular piece as the black hole, but actually it was way bigger than what they showed us. And by looking at that, Harry Kahn applied this geometric form. You see, you can very easily put a grid pattern on it, which is a deformed dodecahedron by the increased spin density of the black hole. So this is why it was deformed, because of the charge field, because of the collapse effect of the spin density. So this is just another example of
Tufan, In the previous slide, he refers to it as the Poincaré space, and the fact that the O5, the Poincaré dodecahedral space, is fundamental to modeling of quantum mechanics in general by Poincaré. And Poincaré pointed to the dodecahedral space as the probable model, and now applying that to the universe geometry, it's just another indication that they're getting close to seeing that golden ratio is how it works.
Yes. Yeah, also in this article, he suggests that constant phi, which directly appears in the geometry of dodecahedron and icosahedron, seems to be the fundamental constant that defines the structure of the atomic nucleus and the structure of the wave systems, orbitals, which form the atomic nucleus.
Yes, and we have a lot of slides about the atomic table. Electrons and nuclear geometries all are platonic.
Right. So fundamental celestial mechanics, they use those symmetry operations which naturally have golden ratio inside. It's just very simple. And another example, many of you may know physics of cymatics, where they put a bunch of sand over a film of metal plate, and as they give frequencies, that metal plate creates a vibration which generates standing waves, and thus you have these geometries on the left. So in 3D, actually, that's what we call implosion. So when we look at the Platonic solids, what we have to visualize or imagine is those faces of Platonic solids, they actually reflect the implosive vortices towards its center. That's how gravity and self-organization is stabilized.
Exactly.
As in the solar system, as in the atomic nucleus, as in the universe, as in the black holes, and
string
so on.
theory says everything is made of vortex and wormholes, but in order for them to be stable, you have to be platonic. And to be platonic, you have to use golden ratio, and that creates implosive charge collapse.
Right. And your consciousness as well. Intentional work, everything. Meditation, flame in mind.
And we did that slide, I think.
We did that. Sorry.
Yes,
also,
that's what we referred to.
Kepler-Munn's model, Platonic solids in geometry of atomic nucleus. So this is very famous. In chemist Munn's model of the nucleus, we see a nesting of 4 of the 5 Platonic solids similar to that conceived by Johannes Kepler to describe the solar system. Now, Munn's work in geometry of atomic nucleus from perfect Platonic solids nesting suggests 3D non-destructive collapse gravity making. So when you see the SPDF suborbitals, they all relate to specific Platonic solids.
The image on the left is Moon. The image on the right is from psi perception of quarks and occult chemistry. So the occult chemistry makes the point that the electron cells are platonic. Moon makes the point that the nucleus is platonic.
Right. Thank you. And going further through our sacred geometry poster, now this part is about the DNA and how DNA generates its centripetal force. So there are a couple of images on this picture on the right. So I'll start with the vertical purple DNA, purple dodecahedron spiral, where you see that the DNA is wrapped around multiple dodecahedrons. So that reflects the relationship, the dodecahedron and its intricate relationship with the DNA, with its geometric alignment to the codons. This subject also ties into the specific operation that we call 5 spins inside and 7 spins outside. And what happens is that the 12-strand DNA might have been misunderstood, but actually we reach the 12 strands DNA by adding 5 spins inside and 7 spins outside. Like if we can understand the cube, as a three dimensional model, as you can see here, the next rotation would give us the fourth dimension as Kepler first suggested us. So what you do is you rotate the cube into a dodecahedron, and that additional spin automatically changes the symmetry operations from one set of symmetry operations to another set of symmetry operations. Then that automatically switches to the next dimension. So after reaching 4, then with the spiraling of the DNA, you can see how the dodecahedron turns around itself while climbing Jacob's ladder or the codons, right? So as the dodecahedron starts turning around itself, that creates an additional spin, which brings you to the fifth dimension. So we consider this 5 spins inside. And the 7 spins that we are talking about is the braiding operation of the DNA. Let me try to play that.
The 5 spins, 7 spins metaphor comes from the Anu, you remember, turning inside out with the 5 spins inside and 7 spins outside. The 7 spins is tetracubic, which you think is inside, but when it turns inside out, well,
right.
I could mention in terms of Terry and my discussion upcoming about Vincent Bridges, Vincent and I had a lifelong argument. He said the hypercube, which is a stellated cube, was, the fourth dimension. And I always said, no, the dodecahedron is the fourth dimension.
So if we see the DNA helix in the form of the slinky, what happens is that the DNA helix braids itself like this. I cannot fully do it. But as it braids itself, it creates an additional rotation, as you can see here.
That's right.
Maybe this is the most psychoactive
Yes.
facts of this reality that you can reach without taking any external substance, if you can understand that part.
We say that the thread becomes the string in one braid, and the string becomes the rope, and the rope becomes fat rope. And if you do that 7 times,
then you reach the chromosomes. So the chromosome is basically braided DNA, 7 times braided outside and 5 spins inside. So there's also another video that explains the braiding operation very nicely. I also want to show you this one.
It's ironic. Almost every woo-woo will say, well, there's supposed to be 12 strands in your DNA, and every biologist will say they're crazy. But now that we see the physics of braiding, we can talk literally about 5 spins, 7 spins, 12 spins in the DNA, not 12 strands. And suddenly we have biophysics instead of woo-woos.
Right. Here it comes.
In this animation, we'll see the remarkable way our DNA is tightly packed up so that 6 feet of this long molecule fits into the microscopic nucleus of every cell.
6 feet.
Starts when DNA is wrapped around special protein molecules called histones. The combined loop of DNA and protein is called a nucleosome.
A braid on the braid on the braid.
Starting.
The nucleosomes are packaged into a thread known as chromatin.
Chromatin. That's packaged.
Its fiber is then looped and further packaged using other proteins which are not shown here.
That's beautiful. That's great. And the plot thickens. The thread becomes string, becomes rope, becomes fat rope. It's literally longer wave embedding.
Into the familiar structures we can see through a microscope. Chromosomes.
Very thick.
Yep, that's it.
Short wave in the long wave.
Right. So, yeah. So that's how DNA braiding operation happens inside
Lovely
the body.
film. Lovely film. Really nice.
Right. And so the picture depicted as number 5, depicts this understanding in the form of frequency envelopes.
Right.
So you can imagine every turn generates an additional frequency on top of each other. So let's say the DNA has its own frequency, first level. As it braids, the first level, it generates an additional frequency on top of it. And another additional braiding adds an additional frequency on top of each other. That creates a frequency envelope, which generates the charge implosive field for the DNA.
And remember, we're saying that when that implosion is golden ratio coherent, that's
Right.
what embeds into the longitudinal array. And we can prove that's the physics of lucid dreaming and what you take when you die. So this is important.
Yeah. Also, Dan's quotation on the poster says, the number of harmonics in your DNA fractal antenna ascend by golden ratio when the spin density braid implosion enables that compression to be implosive, negentropic, and centripetal. Quote from Dan.
And that creates space. So now you know what they meant when they said ascend already. We need the space.
Right. So there is golden ratio everywhere when you look at the DNA, either from the side or from the cross section. But now the point is that it is not only the ratio, but it's also more important than that. It is tuned to Planck constant.
Right.
So and this was discovered by Dan and myself 2 years ago while Dan was working on his new book. I was helping him. And so 21 to 34 angstroms perfectly sit on the Planck scaling of the length, Planck length. This means when you take the golden ratio exponents of Planck length, you reach the specific dimensions. And those dimensions coincide with 21 angstroms and 34 angstroms, which is the dimensions of the DNA, as you see in this picture number 4 on top right. And also number 6 is the cross section of the DNA.
That's right. It was Tufan who discovered that the length versus the width of the one DNA ladder rung, perfect golden ratio, and perfectly tuned to Planck. It's so cool.
And a very extremely elaborate and very nice video of Dan. That's my favorite. The purpose of DNA. That's a wonderful video. I just loved it. I probably watched it so many times. I don't
It's
remember.
been seen by millions, and it's probably about 30 years old. So it reminds me of being young or something.
Yes, if you haven't seen it, please check the purpose of
Look,
DNA.
I was already gray, though.
And that set of systems, the 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside, some additional examples here from alchemy and from biology. In alchemy, we have the sigil of Amet, where you can see the star symbolism inside, and which has 5 spins and another 7 spins outside, which is the field of our special guest, Terry Burns. And maybe it's an appropriate time to give word to Terry. But before that, I would also like to add that in alchemical work, the intention of the practitioner is extremely important, of course. And as we say, golden ratio has to be present in multiple dimensions, including our brain field, including our emotions and everything. So as we get in line with that, the electrical resistance becomes 0, as we said before. And this was explicitly very nicely used in alchemy by earlier alchemists. And Terry and Ellen has been very kind to develop this understanding and teaching us these principles. And maybe we can ask Terry about the specific rituals in alchemy about banishing and invoking by using the star geometry. Thanks for joining us, Terry.
And just
Sure.
to say, not to cut Terry off, but thank you,
no
Terry, that when Terry and I are going to be talking about Vincent Bridges, that link that Tufan has displayed their goldenmean.info/science of alchemy. That's where we introduce all our work with Vincent on alchemy. And the last thought, alchem means access to the chem, CH, the black hole. And the black hole is the implosion, which is the charge collapse, which is the physics of alchemy. And that's the mystery Terry and I are going to be talking about in a couple of weeks. Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, in 2 weeks' time, Terry is going to join us at fractalu.com. Don't miss that. Please go ahead. Take it away.
I don't really know quite how to jump in here other than to say, all right, one of the, just a quick background, I think everyone, so John Dee and Edward Kelly's work on Enochian is right about the time of Queen Elizabeth, Shakespeare, Emperor Rudolph II. You all probably know that. So the Seal of Amet it's a condensation of medieval planetary magic. But one of the things that it has that a lot of medieval planetary magic does not have is a very precise geometry. Something that was happening in the Renaissance was like in the Kabbalah, there would be the idea of like, well, clean up Hebrew, it's the language of God, etc. Reminder of Dan's work here with Hebrew and his flame thing and how you could put light through it to create every letter through a certain refraction. Okay, well, a similar kind of thing that was going on with Hebrew was going on in medieval magic with things like sigils. That is, that they'd gotten kind of sloppy or decrepit, or at least that was the idea in Renaissance Neoplatonism. So here you see that there's a series of heptagons, and then in the middle of it is a pentagon. Nobody then was saying, oh, this is working because there's 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. But perhaps that is why it works. I mean, I think that is why it works, and Alan did, and Vincent did, and it meshes perfectly with the kind of things Dan has been talking about. Okay, move to one of the most basic symbols that you have in ceremonial magic, which is the pentagram. Now, the pentagram, as you all know, is one of the oldest human symbols. It's connected a lot of times to the planet Venus for a whole variety of reasons. But the idea used in the ceremonial magic of the last 150 years of casting a pentagram in 4 different directions to banish things really is not, as far as we know, an ancient Greek kind of thing or an early Renaissance thing. The first you get a hint of it is in the writings of Dee, and you get it paired with archangels. And in fact, I'll be giving a talk on that later in Enochiacon. But then that begs the question of when you cast a pentagram to banish a space or to invoke, why is that working? Now, here is a thing that you find often in the history of science, just like the history of magic, which is if you don't really know how something works, but you know that it works, you try to reverse engineer it. Okay, so when I learned to cast pentagrams, the explanation is simply, well, you're bringing in light and you flood a space with light and it chases away the darkness. Well, that's a nice explanation. It won't get you a lot further without an understanding of dimensionality, which is what Tufan asked me to talk about here. So basically, it opened up a whole, it was Vincent Bridges who pointed out to me that, well, you know what you are doing here is mathematically, all right, you have this 2-dimensional form, a pentagram, which we know is fractal. You can put it in a pentagon and so forth, infinitely either direction. So that is the 2-dimensional shadow, though, of a 4-dimensional object, a pentatope, which is made of tetrahedra, which have their own fascinating properties. Think of like Bucky Fuller and tetrapumps and that kind of thing. But so you have this 4-dimensional form working like, I think of it as like the stamp on those old school typewriters, the little balls that would roll around and stamp out letters. So this pentatope, the tetrahedra rotate, the 5 tetrahedra in the pentatope, and stamp out part of this pentagram you're casting, which is really a pentagram in a pentagon. You cast them in 4 different directions. So that's using the 2-dimensional shadow of a 4-dimensional object to cast a 3-dimensional figure, a cube. But then what happens experientially as my husband Alan he was very clairvoyant and he could sense this, is what about the top and the bottom? What you're feeling is them come together and create this toroidal motion. So it's not exactly that it's a three-dimensional shape. You're getting this cube, and this was Vincent Bridges' innovation with the pentagram ritual of don't make it a three-dimensional thing, put a point in the middle, because what you can feel is this cube start to turn. It's going to start to rotate through its center. And then you become aware of a variety of different things that happen. I mean, you can talk about it the way Vincent did as a hypercube. You can talk about it the way Dan does. See, when they would get into this argument, I would try to go and find out who was right. And I think they're both right, really. I mean, one is Vincent is talking about Cartesian geometry where you add a perpendicular, and what Dan talks about seems to mesh more with the geometry of Bucky Fuller, whose work Dan knows extremely well. But in any case, what I've just talked about is your basic pentagram ritual. You do it one way to banish, another way to invoke. This isn't a class in ceremonial magic, so I won't go through that. Most of you know it anyway. But then the next level of it that is used in Enochian magic or other ceremonial magic is a supreme invoking ritual of the pentagram. Well, what you do then is you cast 8 more of them. And what you feel then is those pentagrams in pentagons start to self-organize into a dodecahedron. You've got 12 of them. And what does that dodecahedron start to do? It starts to rotate. So then if what you're doing in casting this is to get out lower astral garbage, well, that simply vibrates at a lower level. You're not letting it in. And you are trying to create a null space, which, all right, your body's going to remain in 3D, but if you think of your DNA and you have the ability to perceive higher dimensions, even though your body is 3-dimensional. So you're creating this null space where you are open to those kind of energies, for want of a better way of putting it. Now, I don't know if that is at all what you wanted me to talk about, Tufan, but that is the quickest that I can explain pentagrams and how it connects to this idea. The Ophanic system, and what a lot of people who think it is dangerous or think it is stupid or whatever they think about it don't understand, is the pentagon and pentagram are the basis of that system. Right, and that's 5. Everyone knows that who studies John Dee knows he had a heptarchic system. That's 7. So it goes back and forth between 5s and 7s, and that's, we felt anyway, one of the major things that make it work. If the other thing is that the particular letters work as waveguides, which is another whole topic. Anyway, that's about the best I can do in 5 minutes. But
that's great, Terry. Actually, this is very similar to what we have been talking, because when you use 12 pentatodes to compose a dodecahedron, that's a very similar thing what DNA does by creating its frequency envelope, as you said, by going over the lower astral frequencies. So you generate a frequency envelope to raise the vibration, basically, and also creating charge collapse by automatically doing that. And this is what DNA does as well. So DNA uses the cubic shape to generate that dodecahedron, and you are also using the pentatone, which is the 4D of a tetrahedron, which is directly related with the cube as well. So these are like different ways of reaching to the same frequency understanding, frequency signature.
thank you. You put that in a much clearer way than I have put it. And one of the things we puzzled over was, how do you, it seems when you set up a whole Enochian structure, you have all these little bitty hypercubes. I mean, I know this may just sound like we had a fun day on acid or something, but really we are very sober when we do these things, I promise. And it has all kinds of, wow, look at that, other effects. So thanks, that's a very helpful explanation.
And on those moments when Terry said, and it will begin to spin, she also could have said, and then turn inside out and implode.
Yeah, thank you.
So
I'm just
Tufan, that was great.
reshare my presentation, I guess. Just start blinking.
But that was a nice. So what we're saying is understanding magic or understanding alchemy, it's all about charge collapse. And that when that becomes implosive and centripetal is when it's negentropic.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yes. Another example is the heart, human heart, where, all right. I'll be careful if it starts blinking.
Yeah.
So human heart also has the 5 spins and 7 spins system inside and outside. And depending on the layer, on the muscle layer that it generates the compression, the heart sends a specific phonon frequency signature over the glandular system. And then if you would like to say a couple of words explaining that, maybe that would be
Well,
easier.
the idea is that the shadows of the 7 layers of muscle, which are the 7 axes of the tetra, in the way the heart is constructed, is literally the Hebrew alphabet. And the phonon, if you do spectrograms of the Hebrew alphabet, the phonon audio harmonics of the shadows of that muscle are literally how the immune system propagates as sound phonons, propagating the immune system as a tingle through the bloodstream. So it's the sound of the heart propagating down the phonon array of your blood arteries that's actually literally the title of my book, Alphabet of the Heart.
Right. Thank you. And the last example from 5 and 7 spins is the Prague, which is which was considered as the center of alchemy in late Middle Ages. So this is the famous Bohemian Rose depiction of Christoph Wetter in 1668, depicting 5 sacred sites surrounded with 7 mountains that were created 15 million years ago by the famous asteroid, which created all the Moldavite stones on the land.
Well, the story was, to finish that just a little bit, that there were 5 sacred sites and then 7 churches, 5 and 7 spins in the map of Prague, which is literally also a rose. And literally, John Dee supposedly used that geometry to do the ritual, which took out the Spanish Armada, the subject of Shakespeare's play.
Right. And the 7 axes of charge symmetry map of tetracompression is seen on top right.
Which is the Hebrew.
Yes, I started blinking. I hope nothing is going to come up.
So right now we're just seeing a black screen.
Yeah, I just lost my presentation, so watch out.
We're having a few challenges here today. So no, the idea was that then the sonic, the shape of the letters of Hebrew. Fun, please.
All right, so what we have been talking about simplifies the universal frequency cascade proposed by Dan Winter originally, plankfire.com. And basically, the universe has, we can see it this way, the universe has blinking portals every time in the Planck scale, in time, in length, in mass, and as it blinks, opens up and close, any waveguide wants to pass from that opening, they had to adapt to the natural laws of this dimension, which is fractal charge collapse perfected by golden ratio. Otherwise, they cannot sort out their waves, or they cannot maintain their integrity in this dimension. And we can see this in, we gave many examples, just a few of them. We see the photosynthesis frequencies, the DNA dimensions, the radii of hydrogen. Maybe we should just finish and resume this with another.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, guys. Well, are there any quick questions we should try to answer before we leave? Let's see. How are we doing on questions?
Yeah, we had a couple on YouTube. Where are they? what happens below Planck scale?
Yeah, interesting. Physics answered that question is that nothing happens below Planck scale. So no wave length or time has ever been measured by physics to be smaller or shorter than Planck scale.
To that, Raymond Caio measured superluminal speed of light, which was faster than the speed of light, and they did multiple tests, and they realized that all the results came between 1.5 times to 1.7 times the speed of light of their measurements. This means that if you take the average golden ratio, which is 1.618, perfectly sits in the middle. So we get also the clue that next dimension can also be reached by golden ratio, as in Raymond Caio's work, which I was going to talk about it in a few minutes, but
Hi, everybody. This is Dan and Tufan again. This little segment is called Tufan's Climactic Presentation. So last night at FractalU, we had a little logistics difficulty, and so we edited that out, and it's all good. But Tufan didn't get to finish, and the climax. Actually, we had this intense conversation whether to call this a sequel or a prequel. And I'm going to use Star Wars rather, to figure that out, whether this is a sequel or a prequel. Remember, in the prequel, Anakin Skywalker gets analyzed to determine whether he can be a Jedi, as in JediSchool.science. And the determining factor of whether Anakin gets to be a Jedi is they measured his DNA braid recursion implosion coherence, and they named that microchloridians in the blood. How does he raise his Jed when the blood implodes? Well, I happen to know personally some of the people at Montauk who did the same thing for, like Penny Bradley, for those who could steer the time chair at Montauk. Same thing. They called it boson 7 in the blood. Now, why did they call it boson 7? Well, it turns out at the time of the 7th recursive braid, remember tetracube incubating, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. Cue the animation. Tufan, here we go. So
here we go.
Tufan has this gorgeous animation. So here's the DNA. This is the actual biophysics. The thing is, the biophysics people who made this film did not know that we have in fact measured the fact that when this shortwave in the DNA, hopefully the animation will come. So the thread of DNA recursively braid implodes. And what we measured and did measure, in fact, Glenn Ryan did at my suggestion, here's the thread of DNA. It's a helix, right? But it's now going to braid implode with a catalyzing zipper. Oh, it takes it a while there. Yeah. So there's a catalyst in there that structurally helps it shape the angle of the recursive braid. And biophysics knows a lot about the catalyst and how that braiding happened. But what biophysics hasn't acknowledged, which is what Glenn Ryan measured at my suggestion, is that the low-frequency phonon sound coherence, implosive caduceus, of both heart harmonics, coherent heart, and brain harmonics, they're actually the waveguide that sets up the condition for this recursive braiding in DNA. So we started with a thread, and now the thread is turned into string, a braid in the braid. Then the string turns into rope, a braid in the braid in the braid in the braid. And the 7th time that happens, you see the plot thickens. you get a braid in a braid in a braid in a braid. And if the phase coherent relationship of the short wave to the long wave is correct, called boson 7, the 7th spin, the 7th seal has been unpacked, and that's good for the animation. Thank you, Tufan. So it gets so thick that it actually implodes to the point of becoming toroidal and you see the 7 spins is the 7 spins of the tetracube imploding in the inside, while outside there is the pent, the 5 spin. The 5 spin in this case is the DNA thread itself. It's a braided dodeca pent 5 spin symmetry. 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. Geometry of heart muscle, geometry of the anu, the secret of the ages. It's because when they drew the anu with 7 spins outside and 5 spins inside, what they were drawing was the implosive charge collapse when the Platonic nest is completed. How the atomic table is built, how alchemy is built, how all phase conjugate materials are built. It's the recipe for charge collapse implosion, which is the star mother. So suddenly now we know, not just by measurement of the phonon array, but we know what the advanced races were talking about, which who's got the psychokinetic blood can steer the time chariots Montauk. It's those who have coherence in that braid, the 7 spins. So this is there's a Star Wars happily ever after somewhere in this recipe for Tufan's climax. Cue Tufan to finish his story.
Thank you, Dan. So I'm sharing back my presentation.
So we didn't finish last night. So this is just a little insert to finish what we were doing, which is about tunneling. Perfect.
Right. So we were discussing how any wave system, if it decides to come to our universe as we perceive it in the 3 dimensions, would need to resonate with the universal frequency signature, which is the phi exponents of Planck constant in time, in length, and in mass. They had to, the wave system has to resonate with that formula to maintain its and sustain its the coherency in this fractal phase conjugate dimension. And there's a famous study that was done by Raymond Chayo, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. They attempted to measure the superluminal faster than light speed, and they, with multiple tests, they came to the conclusion that this exact speed that is faster than the faster than speed of light is exact between 1.5 multiples and 1.7. So all the outcomes were within that period of frame, and the phi ratio, which is 1.618, sits in between those 1.5 and 1.7. And from this, out of many examples, this one also shows us the clue that resonating with the phi allows not only entering to this dimension, but also going outside from this dimension, from the dimension that we cannot perceive with our 5 senses.
And
so I thought,
if you actually implode to Planck, we think that sets up coherence into the longitudinally propagating array, which is obviously physics of soul and Kesjon body and the Luke Skywalker's Jed. The point being that the longitudinal array, it propagates at multiples golden ratio times the speed of light. And this is the answer to our question whether this is a prequel or a sequel. It's both, because the time travel is enabled specifically there, time being a name, obviously, for relative spin rate.
Yes. And also, when we look at the pregnancy periods, the time, that also exactly resonates with the Planck constant, because, okay, if a being wants to enter to our dimension, as said, it needs to resonate with this universal principle, and meaning it has to respect in time, in distance, in mass, and in other dimensions as well. And this gives us the example from the time dimension, the Planck time, the exponents, phi exponents of Planck time. So the average pregnancy period ranges between 259 days to 294 days, which gives us the average of 276 days exactly. And the 276 days is the summation of 3 consecutive phi integers, phi exponents of Planck length, which is
Planck
230.
Planck time, yes.
Planck time, 237, 238, and integer 239. These are the exact summations of 3 consecutive time periods. And not only that, when we look at the fetal development, the first detectable heartbeat happens on the 21st day, which exactly sits on the integer 235. So these are no coincidence. So if the being wants to sustain itself in this dimension, it has to respect, it has to resonate with the formula of Planck time. right?
Literally,
So,
we called it incubation, and this is incubation. And it's so you're obeying fractality in both time and space to unpack the rows.
yes, and I recently discovered these time resonances in the last few weeks and have been discussing with Dan about arranging a call to explain these
Beautiful work,
nice
Tufan. Beautiful
things.
work, really.
And well, there is more to it. Basically, we are at the start of discovering this science that Dan Winter pioneered, thankfully. And now we will come up with new things for sure. We will discover new things. And one of another thing that I discovered, if there are any DJs that are listening to us right now, I found the exact BPM for DJs to play their tracks. So
Yes.
the exact BPM, beats per minute, I'm not talking about the frequency, I'm just talking about the number of beats per minute, is 103.3 per minute, which gives us 0.581 milliseconds. So this means that if any DJ wants to create a resonant field, they should arrange their turntable or their mixer to exact
The drumming.
103 BPM. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Dan.
Yeah, it's about the drumming of the heartbeat. We've always known that you pay the DJ because everybody wants bliss. And the DJ always knows that he's got to get the drum, the beat aligned with the human heart that experiences beat, which is obviously implosive compression. So we did a lot of the work of that in the harmonic module, biofeedback for heart rates and breath, it's everything. But now there's all a science that's teachable. So group bliss process, which is the fusion process, we have all the clues. We should use them.
Right. So we have optimized the perfect DJ.
Which we have heart biofeedback for. So
Right.
is
And
that the climax then? I mean, was
well,
that
almost.
Yeah.
Almost. And the tool you see on the left is the Planck tuner, which is the phi ruler available at geometricmodels.org, which is the world's first Planck ruler, which measures the Planck distances between 2 and 35 centimeters. Of course, it's not going to measure the molecular distances, but the distances that sits between 2 and 35 centimeters are measurable by the Planck tuner when the shorter segment here aligns with the lines here, as you can see. Can you see my cursor then?
Yes, yes. So it shows the powers of Planck. So not only do
Right.
you have the ratio correct, but you got the scale correct.
Right. So the set of three numbers represent the integer in this formula, Planck length times exponents of golden ratio. So the integer n is replaced by these set of three numbers, which are the indications of, for example, 160 comes to the short segment here, 161 the larger, and 162 the whole. So we have three set of distances all in relation to not only with golden ratio, but also tuned to Planck. This is why this is called Planck tuner.
Which means you
And
can make your building or your structure actually do
Yeah.
implosive charge collapse more accurately.
yeah, you can be an artist or an architect, and the design that you want to build, if you want it to be resonate with the exact Planck constant, then this is a nice tool to give you those directions. And we were talking about babies. Another interesting thing is that the connection between the fetus and the mother is exactly on the belly button connection point through the umbilical cable. And that belly button that has the umbilical cable exactly sits in the golden ratio point of the human body. That's also very instructive. It's not just anywhere. It's at the golden ratio point of the human body when you measure the distance between the belly button and the top of the head and the belly button and the bottom of the feet and divide them into each other, you get 1.618. So it's all related. And you'll find it in many parts of the human body, animals, plants, and everything. And with a simple phi ruler, you can just measure those scales on your hand. For example, the bones on your finger will respect to that ratio. If you can see my hand, you will see these bones
Beautiful.
are exactly arranged.
Beautiful. So when we say let's get physical, we actually mean let's get phi cycle.
Right. And this is also measurable in brainwaves through the Flaming Mind app from Dan Winter and Patrick Boddy. And as the human consciousness, as we get closer to the bliss process, we can measure that our brainwaves are also arranged in golden ratio when we measure the distances between the peak points in beta, alpha, delta, theta frequency ranges. The peaks of those points organize themselves in golden ratio, as in self-organizing, perfected by Planck.
Imploding. And actually, those frequencies turn out to be, when they're ideal, are exactly the Schumann harmonics. Hello.
Yes. So it's all integrated. And what we are doing is taking the science basically and creating healing technologies.
Charge collapse
Successful.
and negentropy.
Right. So it's we went through these slides before. This is the Stradivarius phi chamber, where you eliminate the standing waves by simply arranging the dimensions of your room by 1.618. And if you want to educate yourself on this, we have the Planck set available at geometricmodels.org, which has Dan Winter's latest book, Planck Fire, the Star Mother kit that Dan just showed, Planck tuner, the posters, and the tablet of Shamash Golden Spiral puzzle. And we hope you enjoyed our dense information about switching the dimensions. And I hope that you have a rough idea about the foundational physics under applying this understanding into one's life.
So this was the happily ever after for the Star Wars episode. So Tufan, that was wonderful. Really great summary. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Dan.
So we're going to put this, edit this in at the episode with Tufan at FractalU, and you'll have that video up very shortly. And then we'll see you next week, every Sunday, 2 p.m. New York time, fractalu.com. Thanks, Tufan.
Yes. Thank you, Dan. And see you next week. We'll be talking with Ralph, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Yes. See you next time.
Right.
Blessings.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Just telling it out there now.
It's usually pronounced Raymond Chow, but yes. Well, here's the last question here is, if the direction of rotation is from the outside to the inside, implosive, the influence of the direction of rotation still has an effect. You know, that's a very interesting question, because it's called an enantiomorphism in biophysics, which is that the direction of the helix can determine whether it's centripetal or centrifugal. And a classical example is plus and minus magnetics. You know, the one is actually more centripetal than the other. And even if, but just that the direction of rotation, biophysics hasn't answered why direction of helicity is important, but they knew that every living protein goes one way. And I think it's because the direction of the polarity of lightning that stirred the first primal soup had to be the more centripetal. It's a very interesting discussion, but too much for tonight. But anyway, I just think we want to thank you, Tufan, for preparing a beautiful presentation. I will edit out some of the bad parts.
That's okay.
Yeah, and all the stuff for next week. I guess we'll save it, and next week we'll fix the links, so we'll be streaming it a little bit more precise. Get all the links to the Discord, to the Facebook, so everybody will know where to go, and that won't happen again, you know.
Yeah, so the link itself to the Zoom will stay only on the FractalU website, and we won't publish the Zoom link itself in the public media. Aaron was trying to help. Sorry, we survived. It's all good.
Yeah, we'll schedule. So we'll just do the scheduling, so everyone will get the notification. They'll be able to look through YouTube, but only myself, you, Aaron, Tufan, and the guest will only and our inner group will be able to go on the Zoom.
Okay.
All right, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for a beautiful presentation, Tufan.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Russ. We had some fun. Blessings. Thank you, Dan Mac.
Blessings.
See you again. See you next Sunday. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Tufan.
Bye.
Bye.